February 17th, 1974, Valentine's Day weekend in Fort Worth, Texas. 17-year-old Carla Walker and her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, are leaving a Valentine's Day dance at the Western Hills High School when their romantic evening turns into a nightmare that will haunt Fort Worth for nearly 5 decades. As they sit in Rodney's car in the school parking lot, talking about the dance and making plans for the rest of the weekend, a man approaches their vehicle with a gun. He pistol whips Rodney unconscious and kidnaps Carla, dragging her away into the darkness while her boyfriend lies bleeding and helpless. 3 days later, on February 20th, 1974, Carla's body is found in a culvert near Benbrook Lake, about 10 miles from where she was taken. She has been brutally beaten, tortured, and strangled. The crime shocks the Fort Worth community and launches one of the most intensive criminal investigations in Texas history. Police follow thousands of leads, interview hundreds of suspects, and even identify a prime suspect whose gun magazine is found at the crime scene. But in 1974, forensic science isn't advanced enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the suspect is eventually cleared and released. For 46 years, Carla Walker's case remains unsolved. Her killer lives freely in the same community where he committed his crime, watching as new technologies emerge and forensic science advances in ways that would have convicted him decades earlier. Traditional DNA testing fails repeatedly on the degraded evidence from 1974, and the case seems destined to remain forever cold. But in 2020, a revolutionary company called Othram Inc. develops techniques specifically designed to extract DNA from evidence that seemed hopeless, and genetic genealogy provides the tools to identify killers through family connections that span generations. The breakthrough comes when Othram successfully develops a complete DNA profile from evidence that had been considered too degraded for analysis. Genetic genealogy builds family trees that lead investigators to a 7-year-old man named Glenn Samuel McCurley, who has been living quietly in the Fort Worth area for decades. When investigators run McCurley's name through their old case files, they make a shocking discovery. He was the prime suspect they had questioned in 1974, the man whose gun magazine had been found at the crime scene, the person they had suspected all along but couldn't prove was guilty. The Carla Walker case reveals one of the most important truths about genetic genealogy and cold case investigation. Sometimes the original investigators get it exactly right, but they lack the technology to prove what they know. For 46 years, McCurley lived free, not because he had outsmarted police, but because science hadn't advanced enough to confirm what detectives had suspected from the beginning. When genetic genealogy finally provided that proof in 2020, it vindicated the original investigation and demonstrated that justice, while delayed, is never truly denied when science and determination combine to pursue the truth. Before we examine how genetic genealogy solved a 46-year-old case and proved that the original suspect was guilty all along, make sure you're subscribed to the Investigation Room and hit that notification bell right now. Here at the Investigation Room, we investigate cases where advancing forensic science is finally providing answers to crimes that seemed impossible to solve and justice to victims who deserved better. The Carla Walker case shows how genetic genealogy can work even with the most challenging evidence, and how new technologies can vindicate investigators who were right all along but lacked the tools to prove it. New comprehensive investigations every week, exploring how cases that stumped investigators for decades are finally being solved through revolutionary forensic techniques and careful preservation of evidence. Drop a like if you believe that no case should remain unsolved when the evidence exists to identify killers, no matter how much time has passed. And let me know in the comments what you think about cases where the right suspect was identified decades ago but couldn't be proven guilty until genetic genealogy provided the missing link. Because what we're about to reveal about Carla Walker's case will show you how modern science can reach back across nearly half a century to prove what investigators suspected all along. Carla Jan Walker was born on July 15, 1956, in Fort Worth, Texas, to Jim and Norma Walker, who raised her and her siblings in a close-knit family that emphasized education, hard work, and community involvement. Carla was the kind of teenager who seemed to embody everything positive about American youth in the 1970s. She was beautiful, intelligent, athletic, and popular, with a bright smile and an optimistic outlook on life that drew people to her wherever she went. Her family lived in the Ridgelia area of Fort Worth, a middle-class neighborhood where children could play safely, and parents felt comfortable giving their teenagers the kind of independence that was common in the era before helicopter parenting and constant supervision. Carla was a junior at Western Hills High School, where she was a varsity cheerleader and an honor student who was actively involved in multiple school activities and organizations. Her teachers described her as a motivated student who took her studies seriously and who had ambitious plans for her future, including attending college and pursuing a career in education or social work. She was the kind of student who balanced academic achievement with social activities and who was equally comfortable discussing literature in English class or leading cheers at Friday night football games. As a cheerleader, Carla was part of a tight-knit group of girls who supported the school's athletic teams and who were considered role models for younger students. Cheerleading in the 1970s required not just athletic ability and school spirit, but also the kind of personal character that made cheerleaders representatives of their schools in the community. Carla took this responsibility seriously and was known for her positive attitude, her willingness to help other students, and her commitment to representing Western Hills High School with dignity and pride. Carla was also known for her kindness and compassion toward others, particularly students who were struggling academically or socially. She was the kind of person who would go out of her way to include someone who seemed lonely or to help a classmate who was having difficulty with schoolwork. Her friends remembered her as someone who genuinely cared about other people and who always tried to see the best in everyone she met. This natural empathy and caring nature made her beloved by both peers and adults throughout the school community. Outside of school, Carla enjoyed typical teenage activities of the 1970s, including listening to music, going to movies with friends, and spending time at the mall or other social gathering places where teenagers congregated. She was particularly fond of music and dancing and loved attending school dances and other social events where she could spend time with friends and enjoy the popular music of the era. The Valentine's Day dance at Western Hills High School was exactly the kind of event that Carla loved, combining music, dancing, and social interaction in a safe, supervised environment. Carla had been dating Rodney McCoy, a fellow student at Western Hills High School, for several months leading up to February 1974. Rodney was a popular student in his own right, and the two of them were considered one of the school's it couples, who seemed perfectly matched in terms of personality, interests, and social standing. Their relationship was the kind of wholesome teenage romance that parents approved of and that friends admired, characterized by mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection for each other. The couple had been looking forward to the Valentine's Day dance for weeks, planning their outfits, making dinner reservations, and coordinating with friends who would also be attending the event. For Carla, the dance represented everything she loved about high school social life. The opportunity to dress up, spend time with friends, dance to her favorite songs, and share a special evening with her boyfriend. The anticipation had been building for days, and February 17th promised to be a perfect end to Valentine's Day weekend. On the afternoon of February 17th, 1974, Carla spent hours getting ready for the dance, carefully choosing her outfit, doing her hair, and applying makeup with the kind of attention to detail that only teenage girls can bring to special occasions. Her family later remembered how excited and happy she seemed as she prepared for the evening, talking about her plans and expressing her appreciation for the effort Rodney was making to ensure that their Valentine's celebration would be memorable and romantic. The Valentine's Day dance at Western Hills High School was a well-attended event that brought together students from across the school's social spectrum for an evening of music, dancing, and celebration. The dance was held in the school gymnasium, which had been decorated with Valentine's Day themes and colors, creating a festive atmosphere that captured the spirit of young love and romantic celebration. A local DJ played popular music of the era, including love songs and dance hits that kept the dance floor crowded throughout the evening. Carla and Rodney attended the dance with several other couples and spent the evening enjoying the music, dancing with friends, and participating in the social activities that made high school dances memorable experiences. Friends who saw them at the dance later recalled that they seemed particularly happy that evening, enjoying each other's company and the festive atmosphere of the Valentine's celebration. There was nothing unusual about their behavior or interactions that suggested any problems or concerns about their safety. The dance concluded around 11 p.m., and like many other couples, Carla and Rodney decided to spend some additional time together before ending their Valentine's celebration. Rather than going directly home, they drove to the bowling alley parking lot on South Hills Avenue, a popular gathering place for teenagers who wanted to extend their evenings in a safe, well-lit location where they could talk privately, while remaining in a public area where other young people were likely to be present. The bowling alley parking lot was considered a safe location for teenage couples to spend time together after school events, as it was well-lit, frequently patrolled by police, and generally populated with other young people who were also extending their evenings after dances, movies, or other social activities. Parents in the Fort Worth area generally approved of their teenagers using locations like this for social activities, as they provided the privacy that young couples desired while maintaining the safety and supervision that parents required. Carla and Rodney had been sitting in Rodney's car for about 30 minutes, talking about the dance and making plans for the rest of the weekend, when their Valentine's celebration turned into a nightmare that would haunt Fort Worth for nearly half a century. At approximately 11:30 p.m., a man approached their vehicle and tapped on the driver's side window, apparently asking for directions or assistance. When Rodney rolled down the window to see what the man wanted, the stranger suddenly produced a gun and began attacking him. The attack was swift, brutal, and completely unexpected. The gunman pistol-whipped Rodney repeatedly, striking him in the head with the weapon until he was unconscious and bleeding heavily. Carla screamed for help and tried to assist her boyfriend, but the attacker quickly turned his attention to her, dragging her from the passenger side of the car and forcing her toward his own vehicle, which was parked nearby. Despite her struggles and screams for help, the parking lot was relatively empty, and no one was close enough to intervene or prevent the kidnapping. Rodney regained consciousness several minutes later to find Carla gone and himself bleeding from multiple head wounds. Despite his injuries and disorientation, he immediately understood the gravity of the situation and drove himself to the nearest hospital, where he received treatment for his injuries and contacted police to report Carla's kidnapping. His account of the attack provided investigators with their first description of the perpetrator and the circumstances of Carla's abduction. The Fort Worth Police Department responded immediately to Rodney's report, launching one of the largest and most intensive criminal investigations in the city's history. Every available detective was assigned to work on Carla's case, and investigators from surrounding jurisdictions offered their assistance and expertise. The FBI was also contacted for their resources in kidnapping cases and their access to behavioral analysis experts who might help identify the type of person who would commit such a crime. The initial investigation focused on finding Carla alive, as investigators hoped that she had been kidnapped for ransom or other purposes that might result in her safe return. Police issued alerts throughout Texas and surrounding states, providing descriptions of Carla and her abductor to law enforcement agencies, hospitals, and the media. Radio and television stations broadcast regular updates about the case, asking the public to report any sightings of Carla or anyone matching the description of her kidnapper. However, investigators also began preparing for the possibility that Carla had been harmed by her abductor. They organized search teams to comb through areas around Fort Worth where a kidnapper might take a victim, including remote locations, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas that could provide privacy for criminal activity. The search effort involved hundreds of volunteers from the community, including friends and classmates of Carla, who were determined to help find her and bring her home safely. The search for Carla continued around the clock for 3 days, with investigators following every lead and pursuing every possibility that might result in finding her alive. The community response was overwhelming, with local businesses donating food and supplies for searchers, and ordinary citizens volunteering their time to help with the massive effort to locate Carla. The case became a community-wide priority that brought people together in their determination to find the missing teenager. The discovery came on February 20th, 1974, when searchers found Carla's body in a culvert near Benbrook Lake, about 10 miles from the bowling alley where she had been kidnapped. The location was remote and would have been familiar only to someone who knew the area well or who had specifically scouted locations where a body could be hidden. Carla had been brutally beaten, tortured, and strangled, and the condition of her body indicated that she had been killed shortly after her abduction, rather than being held captive for an extended period. The discovery of Carla's body transformed the investigation from a kidnapping case into a homicide investigation and intensified the urgency of finding her killer. The crime scene was processed meticulously by forensic specialists who documented every aspect of the scene and collected all available physical evidence. However, forensic science in 1974 was limited compared to modern techniques, and much of the evidence that was collected could not be analyzed in ways that would be useful for identifying suspects. The investigation immediately focused on developing a profile of Carla's killer based on the circumstances of the crime and the evidence that had been collected. The brutality of the attack suggested that the perpetrator was someone with a history of violence, or someone who derived satisfaction from inflicting pain and suffering on others. The fact that he had targeted a young couple in a public location indicated either extreme boldness or complete disregard for the risk of being caught. Investigators also recognized that the killer had demonstrated knowledge of the Fort Worth area, both in his selection of the bowling alley parking lot as a place to find victims, and in his choice of the remote location where he had disposed of Carla's body. This suggested that he was likely a local resident who was familiar with both populated areas where teenagers gathered and isolated locations where criminal activity could be conducted without detection. The investigation into Carla's murder became one of the most extensive criminal investigations in Fort Worth history, with detectives interviewing thousands of people, following countless leads, and pursuing every possible avenue that might lead to the identification of her killer. The case generated extensive media coverage throughout Texas and attracted national attention as well, as kidnapping and murder cases involving teenagers always drew significant public interest and concern. One of the most promising early leads in the investigation came from the discovery of a gun magazine at the crime scene where Carla's body was found. The magazine was for a specific type of firearm and was relatively new, suggesting that it had been dropped recently by someone who had been at the location. Investigators immediately began trying to trace the magazine to determine who had purchased it and how it had ended up at the crime scene. The gun magazine provided investigators with their first significant physical evidence that might lead to the identification of Carla's killer. Firearms and ammunition were sold through licensed dealers who maintained records of their sales, and investigators hoped that they would be able to trace the magazine back to a specific purchaser who could then be investigated as a potential suspect in Carla's murder. The investigation of the gun magazine led detectives to Glenn Samuel McCurley, a 30-year-old Fort Worth resident who had recently purchased ammunition for the type of firearm associated with the magazine found at the crime scene. McCurley became an immediate person of interest in the investigation, and detectives began conducting a thorough background investigation to determine whether he could be connected to Carla's murder through additional evidence or witnesses. Background investigation of McCurley revealed that he lived and worked in the Fort Worth area and would have been familiar with both the bowling alley where Carla was kidnapped and the remote location where her body was found. He had access to vehicles that would have allowed him to transport a victim from one location to another, and his work schedule would have given him the freedom to be in the area during the time when Carla's kidnapping occurred. McCurley was brought in for questioning about his possible connection to Carla's murder, and investigators confronted him with the evidence of the gun magazine that had been found at the crime scene. However, McCurley denied any involvement in Carla's kidnapping or murder, and provided explanations for how the magazine might have ended up at the location that didn't directly implicate him in the crime. During the interrogation, McCurley claimed that he had been target shooting in the area where Carla's body was found, and that he might have dropped the magazine during that legitimate activity. He provided what appeared to be credible explanations for his presence in both locations that were relevant to the case, and investigators were unable to find additional evidence that would definitively connect him to Carla's murder. The limitations of forensic science in 1974 meant that investigators could not analyze physical evidence from the crime scene in ways that would provide definitive identification of the perpetrator. DNA analysis did not exist as a forensic tool. Fingerprint analysis was less sophisticated than modern techniques, and many other forms of physical evidence could not be processed in ways that would be useful for identifying suspects. Without additional evidence that could definitively connect McCurley to Carla's murder, investigators were forced to release him and continue their search for other suspects. However, many of the detectives working on the case remained convinced that McCurley was responsible for Carla's death, and his name remained at the top of their suspect list even as they pursued other leads and possibilities. The investigation continued for months and then years, with detectives following thousands of additional leads and interviewing hundreds of other potential suspects. The case generated numerous tips from the public, some of which led to promising new avenues of investigation, but none of which ultimately resulted in the identification of Carla's killer or the development of sufficient evidence to make an arrest. As time passed without significant progress in the case, it gradually transitioned from an active investigation to a cold case that was reviewed periodically, but lacked new leads or evidence to pursue. This was devastating for Carla's family, who had hoped that her killer would be identified and prosecuted quickly, providing them with the justice and closure that they desperately needed. The case remained in the files of the Fort Worth Police Department for decades, with occasional efforts to review the evidence using new technologies as they became available. However, repeated attempts to develop usable DNA profiles from the 1,974 evidence were unsuccessful due to degradation that had occurred over time and the limitations of the extraction techniques that were available for forensic laboratories. In the 1990s, when DNA analysis first became available for forensic investigation, Carla's case was among those that investigators hoped might be solved through this revolutionary new technology. However, the evidence from 1,974 had degraded significantly over the intervening 20 years, and early attempts to extract DNA were unsuccessful. The organic materials that contained genetic information had broken down to the point where traditional DNA analysis techniques could not develop profiles suitable for comparison purposes. Additional attempts were made to analyze the evidence, as DNA technology continued to advance throughout the 2000s and 2010s, but these efforts were also unsuccessful. The evidence was simply too old and too degraded for the DNA extraction and analysis techniques that were available to forensic laboratories during this period. Each failed attempt was another disappointment for Carla's family, and for investigators who remained convinced that the evidence existed to solve the case, if only they could find a way to analyze it properly. The breakthrough came in 2019, when the Fort Worth Police Department contacted Othram Incorporated, a company that specialized in developing DNA profiles from evidence that was too degraded for traditional analysis techniques. Othram had been founded by Dr. David Middleman and had developed proprietary techniques for extracting and analyzing DNA from challenging samples that had been considered unsuitable for forensic testing by other laboratories. Othram's approach to degraded DNA evidence was fundamentally different from traditional forensic DNA analysis. Rather than relying on standard extraction and amplification techniques that required relatively intact genetic material, Othram used advanced sequencing technologies and computational methods that could work with highly degraded samples that contained only fragments of DNA rather than complete genetic profiles. The company had already achieved success with several high-profile cold cases where traditional DNA analysis had failed, and their reputation for solving unsolvable cases made them an attractive option for law enforcement agencies that had exhausted other forensic possibilities. Fort Worth investigators hoped that Othram's advanced techniques might finally be able to develop a usable DNA profile from the evidence in Carla's case. Othram's analysis of the evidence from Carla Walker's case took several months and required multiple attempts using different extraction and sequencing approaches. The company's scientists worked systematically through the available biological evidence, applying increasingly sophisticated techniques to extract genetic information from materials that had been degraded for more than 45 years. The breakthrough came when Othram successfully developed a complete DNA profile from evidence that had been collected at the crime scene in 1974. The profile was suitable for genetic genealogy analysis and represented the first usable genetic information that investigators had been able to obtain from Carla's case, despite decades of attempts using traditional forensic techniques. With a complete DNA profile in hand, Fort Worth investigators partnered with genetic genealogists to begin building family trees that could potentially lead to the identification of Carla's killer. The process was similar to what had been used in other genetic genealogy cases, involving the upload of the DNA profile to public genealogy databases and the systematic construction of family trees based on genetic matches that were identified. The genetic genealogy research progressed rapidly due to the quality of the DNA profile that Othram had developed and the availability of extensive genealogical records for families in the Texas region. The genetic matches that were identified suggested that the perpetrator's ancestors had been in Texas for multiple generations, which was consistent with the geographic location of the crime and the perpetrator's apparent familiarity with the Fort Worth area. After several weeks of genealogical research, investigators had narrowed their search to a small number of potential suspects who met both the genetic criteria and the investigative profile that had been developed for Carla's killer. The research indicated that the perpetrator was likely a man who would have been in his 20s or 30s in 1974 and who had long-term connections to the Fort Worth area. The genetic genealogy research led investigators to Glenn Samuel McCurley, now 77 years old and still living in the Fort Worth area. When investigators ran McCurley's name through their case files, they made the shocking discovery that he was the same person who had been their primary suspect in 1974, the man whose gun magazine had been found at the crime scene, the individual they had questioned extensively but had been forced to release due to insufficient evidence. The realization that genetic genealogy had led them back to their original suspect was both vindicating and sobering for investigators. It confirmed that their 1,974 investigation had been on the right track, and that they had correctly identified the perpetrator despite lacking the technological tools needed to prove his guilt. At the same time, it highlighted the tragedy of 46 years, during which McCurley had lived freely while Carla's family had been denied justice. On September 21, 2020, Fort Worth police officers arrested Glenn Samuel McCurley at his home, 46 years and 7 months after Carla Walker's murder. The arrest was the result of one of the longest criminal investigations in Fort Worth history and represented the successful conclusion of a case that had haunted the community for nearly half a century. McCurley initially maintained his innocence when confronted with the DNA evidence that linked him to Carla's murder. However, the genetic evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible, providing definitive proof that he had been present at the crime scene and had been involved in Carla's death. The DNA profile that Othram had developed matched McCurley's genetic information with a probability of trillions to 1, making it virtually impossible that anyone else could have been responsible for the crime. Faced with the undeniable DNA evidence, McCurley eventually confessed to kidnapping and murdering Carla Walker. His confession provided investigators and Carla's family with details about the crime that had remained unknown for 46 years, including his motivations and the specific actions he had taken during the kidnapping and murder. McCurley admitted that he had been looking for victims on the night of February 17, 1974, and that he had specifically targeted young couples who were isolated and vulnerable to attack. He had seen Carla and Rodney in the bowling alley parking lot and had decided to approach their car with the intention of robbing them and potentially committing sexual assault. The confession revealed that McCurley had not known Carla or Rodney personally, and that his attack on them had been a crime of opportunity rather than a targeted assault against specific individuals. This random nature of the crime explained why the original investigation had struggled to identify connections between McCurley and his victims, as there were no pre-existing relationships or interactions that would have led investigators to consider him as a suspect. McCurley also admitted to the brutal torture and murder of Carla, providing details about his actions that confirmed the findings of the original forensic investigation, while adding new information about the specific methods he had used and his motivations for the extreme violence he had inflicted on his victim. The confession provided closure for Carla's family, who had waited 46 years to learn the truth about what had happened to their daughter and sister. While nothing could undo the decades of pain and uncertainty they had endured, the resolution of the case finally provided them with the answers they had been seeking, and the knowledge that Carla's killer would be held accountable for his crimes. McCurley was charged with capital murder in connection with Carla's death, and prosecutors indicated that they would seek the maximum penalty available under the law. However, given McCurley's advanced age and the amount of time that had passed since the crime, the practical focus of the legal proceedings was on ensuring that he would spend the remainder of his life in prison rather than on pursuing the death penalty. The case proceeded through the legal system relatively quickly, as McCurley's confession and the DNA evidence made it impossible for him to mount an effective defense against the charges. In March 2021, McCurley pleaded guilty to capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never be released from custody. The resolution of Carla Walker's case became one of the most prominent examples of how advanced DNA analysis and genetic genealogy could solve cases that had been considered hopeless due to the age and degradation of the Walkers. Evidence. The success of Othram's techniques in developing a usable DNA profile from 46-year-old evidence demonstrated that virtually no case should be considered permanently unsolvable as long as biological evidence exists and continues to be preserved. The case also highlighted the importance of evidence preservation and the value of maintaining cold case files, even when there seems to be little hope of resolution. The evidence that ultimately solved Carla's case had been carefully preserved by the Fort Worth Police Department for nearly 5 decades, waiting for technology to advance enough to unlock its secrets. Most significantly, the Carla Walker case demonstrated one of the most important principles of genetic genealogy and cold case investigation. Sometimes the original investigators get it exactly right, but they lack the technological tools needed to prove what they know. The 1974 investigation had correctly identified McCurley as the prime suspect and had developed compelling circumstantial evidence pointing to his guilt. But forensic science had not yet advanced to the point where that evidence could provide definitive proof. The vindication of the original investigation was particularly meaningful for the detectives who had worked on Carla's case in 1974 and who had remained convinced of McCurley's guilt despite being forced to release him due to insufficient evidence. Many of these investigators had retired or died during the 46 years that passed before the case was solved, but their careful work and accurate instincts had ultimately been proven correct by advancing technology. The case also demonstrated the evolution of forensic science and the dramatic improvements in DNA analysis that had occurred between 1974 and 2020. The same evidence that had been useless for identification purposes in 1974 had become the key to solving the case, once appropriate extraction and analysis techniques had been developed. This progression highlighted the importance of continued investment in forensic research and the potential for future technological advances to solve cases that remain unsolvable today. The success of genetic genealogy in Carla's case contributed to its growing acceptance and adoption by law enforcement agencies across the United States and around the world. The case provided another dramatic example of how the technique could work even under challenging circumstances and how it could provide justice to victims and families who had been waiting decades for answers. The Carla Walker case also raised important questions about the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution and the concept of justice delayed. McCurley had lived freely for 46 years after committing his crime, during which time he had been able to build a life, maintain relationships, and participate in his community, while Carla's family had been denied justice and closure. The case highlighted the importance of pursuing criminal prosecutions, regardless of how much time has passed, as long as evidence exists to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The resolution of the case provided hope to other families who were still waiting for justice in their own cold cases. The success of advanced DNA analysis and genetic genealogy in solving a 46-year-old case demonstrated that virtually no case should be considered permanently hopeless and that advancing technology might eventually provide the tools needed to identify killers who had escaped justice for decades. The case also highlighted the importance of community support for cold case investigations and the value of maintaining public interest in unsolved crimes. The Fort Worth community had never forgotten Karla Walker, and the continued attention to her case had helped maintain investigative interest and had provided the motivation needed to pursue new technological approaches when they became available. For forensic science and genetic genealogy, the Karla Walker case represented a significant milestone in demonstrating the potential of advanced DNA analysis techniques to work with challenging evidence. Othram's success in developing a usable DNA profile from 46-year-old degraded evidence established new standards for what could be considered analyzable and provided hope for thousands of other cold cases with similar evidence preservation challenges. The case also demonstrated the importance of collaboration between different types of forensic specialists, including traditional crime scene investigators, advanced DNA analysts, and genetic genealogists. The resolution of Karla's case required expertise from all of these disciplines working together in coordination to extract maximum value from the available evidence and to translate genetic information into actionable investigative leads. Looking back on the Karla Walker case, it serves as a powerful example of how persistence, technological advancement, and careful evidence preservation can combine to provide justice even decades after crimes are committed. The case proved that no killer is truly safe from advancing science, and that the passage of time, while it may delay justice, cannot prevent it when investigators refuse to give up and when technology continues to evolve in ways that open new possibilities for solving old cases. The vindication of the 1974 investigation was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the case's resolution, as it demonstrated that good detective work and accurate instincts remain valuable even when technological limitations prevent immediate resolution. The original investigators had correctly identified the perpetrator, but they had been born 46 years too early to have access to the tools they needed to prove his guilt. The Karla Walker case will be remembered as one of the most dramatic examples of how genetic genealogy can reach back across decades to identify killers and provide justice to victims who had been waiting far too long for answers. It demonstrated that the combination of advanced forensic science and genetic genealogy represents a revolutionary approach to cold case investigation that can solve cases that once seemed permanently hopeless. Most importantly, the case provided justice for Karla Walker, a 17-year-old cheerleader whose life was cut short by a violent criminal who thought he had escaped consequences for his actions. 46 years after her death, Karla finally received the justice she deserved, and her killer was held accountable for the brutal crime that had haunted Fort Worth for nearly half a century. The resolution of Karla's case also provided closure for her family, who had never stopped hoping that her killer would eventually be identified and prosecuted. While nothing could restore the decades of pain and uncertainty they had endured, the successful conclusion of the case provided them with the knowledge that Karla had not been forgotten and that justice, while delayed, had ultimately prevailed. Thank you for watching this investigation into how a 46-year-old cold case was finally solved and how the original suspect was proven guilty all along through genetic genealogy. If you believe that no case should remain unsolved when evidence exists to identify killers, subscribe to the Investigation Room right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into cases where advancing science is finally bringing justice to victims who deserved answers decades ago. Share this video with anyone who wants to understand how genetic genealogy is solving cases that seemed permanently hopeless and vindicating investigators who were right all along but lacked the technology to prove it. And let me know in the comments what you think about cases where the original investigation identified the right suspect but couldn't prove guilt until decades later. The Karla Walker case proves that genetic genealogy can work even with the most challenging evidence, and that sometimes the best detective work is vindicated by advancing technology that provides the tools to prove what investigators knew all along.